They told me to strip. I'm standing in the middle of Hangar 7 half naked in front of 20 men who think this is entertainment. My coveralls are tied around my waist. My t-shirt is somewhere on the concrete floor, and Corporal Brennan is circling me like I'm livestock at auction. "Turn around," he says. "Full inspection." I turn, slowly, because I know what they're about to see. The tattoo runs down my spine like a lightning bolt. Black triangle sharp as a blade, numbers below it, V-03147, and at the base wings spread wide a bird of prey. The hangar goes quiet, then Colonel Cross walks through the door, and everything stops. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let me back up. Let me tell you how a Tuesday morning inspection turned into the moment my past caught up with me. Let me tell you about the day I stopped being invisible. 3 hours earlier. My name is Evelyn Garrett. I'm 47 years old. I inspect helicopters for a living. Nobody looks at me twice. That's exactly how I want it. I pulled into Falcon Ridge Air Station at 0800 hours, October 15th, 2024. The desert heat was already baking the tarmac in Arizona. 103 degrees before 9 a.m. The kind of heat that makes asphalt shimmer and turns the horizon into liquid. The gate guard was maybe 20. Babyface, fresh uniform, still believed the military was exactly what the recruiters promised. He checked my contractor badge against his list with the careful attention of someone who'd been chewed out for missing details. "Purpose of visit, ma'am. Structural assessment, Hangar 7, Black Hawk." He typed into his computer, squinted at the screen, looked at my license photo, then at my face, probably wondering how someone who looked like a tired librarian ended up inspecting military aircraft. "You'll need to sign in at the duty station. Hangar 7 is across the flight line past the fuel depot." "I know where it is." He handed back my credentials, waved me through. I drove past rows of helicopters lined up like sleeping predators. Blackhawks, Apaches, Chinooks, each one worth more than I'd make in 5 years. Each one maintained by kids who learned their trade from manuals and prayers. The parking lot outside Hangar 7 was half empty. Early shift, most crews still at morning briefing. I grabbed my toolbox from the truck bed, battered metal case older than most of the airmen on this base. The handle was wrapped in duct tape that had been replaced so many times it was more tape than handle. I hefted it. 40 pounds of precision instruments, hand tools, and diagnostic equipment. My shoulder protested. Old injury never quite healed right. But pain is just information. You learn to file it away and keep moving. The walk across the tarmac felt like crossing a griddle. Heat rose in waves. Jet fuel smell mixed with hot concrete, and that particular scent of military bases everywhere. A combination of hydraulic fluid cleaning solvent and the sweat of young men trying to prove themselves. The duty station was just inside the hangar entrance. A desk, a computer, a logbook that had been signed by every contractor and technician who'd walked through these doors. And behind the desk, Duty Sergeant Marcus Kane, 58 years old, 30 years maintaining aircraft, gray stubble on his jaw grease under his fingernails' eyes that had seen enough hydraulic failures and engine fires to know when something was wrong before the gauges did. He looked up when I approached. His eyes registered me another contractor, another inspection, another Tuesday. I set my toolbox down, pulled out my credentials folder, placed it on the desk. Evelyn Garrett, structural assessment on Black Hawk tail number 647. Kane opened the folder. Scanned my clearances, my certifications, my insurance documentation. His eyes moved across the page with practiced efficiency. Then he hit my signature. His hand paused, just for a second, maybe less. Block letters, all capitals, precise spacing, no wasted motion. The kind of handwriting you develop when you've filled out after-action reports in sandstorms, when you've signed equipment checklists with mortars falling in the distance, when your signature is a promise written in your own blood that the gear you're approving won't get someone killed. Kane looked up at me, really looked at me this time. I met his eyes, calm, direct, gave him nothing. He closed the folder, handed it back. "Aircraft's in Bay 7. Pre-flight inspections already done, but feel free to run your own checks." "Thank you, Sergeant." He nodded, went back to his paperwork, But I saw the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes tracked me as I walked deeper into the hangar. He knew, maybe not everything, but enough to recognize that signatures like mine don't come from civilian trade schools. The hangar was a cathedral of metal and noise, 50,000 square feet of workspace, ceilings high enough to accommodate rotor blades, overhead cranes hanging like mechanical spiders, tool carts scattered across the floor, air compressor hoses snaking between workstations, and everywhere the smell: jet fuel, hot metal, hydraulic fluid, WD-40, that sharp cocktail of industrial chemicals and machinery that every mechanic knows by heart. The Black Hawk sat in Bay 7 like a sleeping dragon. $35 million of turbine engines, composite materials, and avionics systems, designed to carry 11 soldiers into combat and bring them home alive, if it was maintained properly. I set down my toolbox, pulled out my clipboard, started my walk-around inspection, port side first, landing gear struts, hydraulic lines, fuel connections. Running my fingers along seams, feeling for stress cracks the eye might miss. Checking torque on access panels, looking for safety wire that might have worked loose. The mechanics were scattered across the hangar, maybe 15 of them, young, most barely old enough to drink, wearing coveralls that still had crisp creases, boots that hadn't seen enough flight lines to break them in properly. They glanced at me occasionally, old woman with a clipboard, contractor doing boring work while they handled the real business of keeping birds airworthy. I was invisible to them. That suited me fine. I moved to the tail rotor assembly, knelt down, ran my hand along the drive shaft housing. That's when I felt it. Vibration pattern, wrong frequency. The metal was stressed in a way it shouldn't be, not wear and tear from normal operations. Something else. I traced the housing to the mounting bracket, found the source. Someone had over-torqued the bolts. Not enough to cause immediate failure, but enough that metal fatigue would propagate through the assembly. Give it another 100 flight hours, maybe 200, and the tail rotor would develop a harmonic vibration that would make the aircraft unflyable, or worse, make it flyable right up until it wasn't. I made a mental note, but I didn't write it down on my inspection sheet. Not yet, because after 13 years of staying invisible, you learn when to document and when to just remember, when to follow protocol and when to trust your instincts that something doesn't add up, and something didn't add up. Over-torqued bolts weren't the kind of mistake experienced mechanics made by accident. Someone had done this deliberately, either through incompetence so profound it bordered on sabotage, or through actual intent. I'd been sent to 3 bases in the past 6 months, 3 different installations, 3 different maintenance crews, and at each one I'd found similar patterns. Small things, things that could be explained away as human error, but taken together they formed a picture I didn't like. I glanced around the hangar, mechanics working, normal operations. Nothing obviously wrong, but my instincts, the same instincts that had kept me alive in Afghanistan, were screaming that something here needed watching. I'd document the tail rotor, but I'd also pay attention, see if other patterns emerged, see if this base was like the others, or if it was something worse. I stood, brushed dust off my knees, moved to the main rotor assembly. That's when I heard the voice behind me. "Excuse me, ma'am." He didn't walk over, made me come to him. Corporal Dylan Brennan was 22 years old and thought he owned the world. Fresh chevrons on his sleeve, 3 months since his promotion. Boots polished to mirrors. Uniform pressed sharp enough to cut paper. The kind of young NCO who confused rank with authority and volume with leadership. He stood with his arms folded, chin up, shoulders back. The universal posture of young men who haven't yet learned that real power doesn't need to announce itself. Behind him, 3 other mechanics had drifted closer, drawn by that magnetic pull of someone potentially getting hassled. Entertainment on a slow Tuesday morning. Specialist Tommy Wells, 19 years old, soft hands that had never worked on anything more complex than a lawnmower before the Air Force. He was already holding his phone, angling it low like he was checking messages. but I saw the camera lens pointed my direction. Private First Class Derek Landry, 21. Spent most of his free time playing video games and complaining about military food. He was grinning, the kind of grin that says someone else's discomfort is the highlight of his day. Senior Airman Jackson Calloway, 25, should have known better, should have been the voice of reason. But he was too busy trying to fit in with the younger guys to speak up. I walked over to Brennan, kept my face neutral, my toolbox in one hand, clipboard in the other. "How can I help you, Corporal? You here for the avionics inspection on structural assessment?" He made a show of thinking about that, like he was working through complex regulations in his head, like he had any idea what he was talking about. "Can I see your clearance documentation?" I set down my toolbox, pulled my credentials folder from my coverall pocket, handed it over without comment. Brennan opened it slowly, examined each page like he was some kind of expert, squinting at certification stamps, running his finger along the embossed seals, making sure everyone watching knew he was being thorough. Wells moved closer, phone still in his hand. "Looks legitimate," Brennan said finally, like he'd caught me in a lie and was disappointed to find everything in order. "Says here you're cleared for structural work. That's not the same as full access." "Structural assessment includes avionics mounting points," I replied evenly. "Has since 2018, FAA Regulation 14 CFR, Part 43, Appendix D. Wells laughed. "She knows the regs better than you do, Corporal." Brennan's jaw tightened. He didn't like being shown up, especially not by a middle-aged woman in front of his crew. "Well, regulations have changed again," he folded his arms. "New electromagnetic security protocols. Came down from command last week. Can't have unauthorized electronics near sensitive equipment." That was a lie, and everyone within earshot knew it. Across the hangar, Sergeant Kane looked up from his desk. His eyes narrowed. "Brennan," Kane called out. "What the hell are you doing?" "Just following protocol, Sergeant. Chain of command. I've got this." Kane's jaw worked like he was chewing gravel, but he didn't push it. Young Corporal asserting his authority. Old Sergeant knowing that sometimes you have to let puppies bark themselves out before they learn. He went back to his paperwork, but his shoulders were tight. His pen grip looked like he wanted to strangle it. Brennan turned back to me, emboldened now. Audience engaged, Sergeant backing down. "Like I was saying, new security measures. Need to verify all personnel aren't carrying contraband devices. Phones, recording equipment, transmitters." He paused. Let the next words hang in the air. "Could be sewn into clothing, hidden in undergarments." The hangar got quieter, not silent. Tools still whirred, engines still hummed in the distance, but conversations dropped to murmurs. That universal shift that happens when people sense something crossing a line. Landry's grin got wider. Wells adjusted his phone angle. Calloway shifted his weight. Uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable enough to walk away. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" I kept my voice level. "Professional." Gave him nothing to grab onto. "Strip search, top half, standard procedure for uncleared personnel in restricted areas." The words landed like stones in still water. Ripples spreading outward. More mechanics looked up from their work. A crew chief near Bay 3 stopped what he was doing, watched, waiting to see how this played out. I stood there for a long moment, clipboard in my hands, looking at this kid who thought humiliating me would make him feel bigger. I could have called Kane over, could have demanded to speak to a supervisor, could have walked out of this hangar and never come back. But if I fought this, questions would get asked, backgrounds would get checked. Someone would dig into who Evelyn Garrett really was, where she came from, why her employment history only went back to 2012. They'd find out that Evelyn Garrett didn't exist before that she was a ghost built on paperwork and clearances that went deeper than Brennan could imagine. And then the real questions would start. Better to endure this. Better to let some punk kid have his moment. Better to stay invisible even when they're staring right at you. I set my clipboard down on a nearby workbench. Started unzipping my coveralls. "Jesus, she's actually doing it," Wells whispered. The fabric parted with the soft whisper of worn cotton. I'd been wearing these coveralls for 3 years. Washed them so many times the blue had faded to gray. patched the knees twice, reinforced the pockets where tools had worn through. I pulled the coveralls down to my waist, tied the sleeves around my hips, stood there in my sports bra and work pants. No jewelry, no hidden devices, just the practical undergarments of someone who dressed for function, not fashion. Sports bra faded from too many wash cycles. Dog tags tucked underneath pressed against my sternum where they'd rested for 13 years. The mechanics stared, not with respect or professionalism, with the ugly curiosity of men who'd found someone they could push around without consequences. Brennan circled me slowly, playing to his audience, making sure everyone saw him asserting his authority. "Satisfied?" I asked. He grinned. "Turn around. Full inspection." And that's when I knew this moment would change everything. Because I knew what was on my back. I knew what they were about to see, and I knew that once they saw it, invisibility was over. But I'd made my choice, so I owned it. I turned, slowly. The sports bra had a racer back, left my spine completely exposed from the base of my neck to my belt line. The tattoo ran down my back like a scar from a lightning strike. At the top, just below my neck, a black triangle, downward pointing, sharp as a blade, 2 inches tall, perfectly symmetrical edges, crisp as the day it was inked. Below that, numbers, V-03147, military stencil font, each character an inch high. Black ink that had faded slightly over 13 years, but still stood out stark against my pale skin. And at the base, just above my waistband, the silhouette of a bird of prey, wings spread wide, talons extended, rendered in the same sharp black ink. Not decorative, not artistic, functional, identifying, permanent. Most of the mechanics didn't understand what they were looking at. Wells zoomed in with his phone. "Check out Granny's ink. Didn't know contractors were allowed tattoos that big." Landry laughed, nervous energy. "Probably got it in the National Guard or something, basic training rebellion." But Calloway had gone quiet. His grandfather had served in Desert Storm, special operations, the kind of missions that got classified and stayed classified. And before his grandfather died, he'd shown Calloway photographs, unit insignias that didn't exist in any official documentation, markings that meant something to people who knew where to look. Calloway's face had gone white. "Jesus Christ, Brennan," he said quietly. "What did you do?" Brennan turned. "What? That's not... Do you have any idea what that..." That's when the folder hit the floor. The sound echoed through the hangar like a gunshot. Sharp, final, wrong. Every conversation stopped. Every tool went silent. Even the distant radio chatter seemed to pause. I didn't turn around, but I knew who it was. I knew because I'd been waiting for this moment for 13 years. The moment when someone would see, someone would recognize, someone would know. "Jesus Christ," a voice whispered. Colonel Nathan Cross stood in the hangar doorway with 2 junior officers flanking him. The folder he'd been carrying was on the concrete, papers scattered across oil-stained cement. He was 52 years old, 28 years in service, silver eagles on his shoulders, 3 rows of ribbons on his chest, distinguished flying cross, bronze star, Purple Heart. And right now, his face was the color of desert sand, because Nathan Cross had been a major in 2011 intelligence liaison at Bagram Air Base, Afghanistan. He'd had clearance for black operations briefings. He'd read after-action reports that were shredded the same day they were written. He'd seen unit insignias that officially didn't exist, and he was looking at one right now, on the back of a middle-aged civilian contractor standing half-naked in his hangar. The triangle wasn't decoration. It was a unit identifier, Task Force Viper, a black operations group that had never existed on paper, never appeared in any organizational chart, never had a budget line item, but they'd existed, in the places where official military couldn't go, doing the jobs that couldn't be acknowledged. The numbers weren't random. V-03147. Mission code. Afghanistan, March 2011. An operation that had gone so wrong it was classified beyond top secret. Buried so deep that even people with clearance weren't supposed to know it happened. And the bird. That wasn't symbolic. That was a designation, given to operators who'd been left behind enemy lines and found their own way home. The survivors who'd crawled out of hell carrying intelligence that saved lives. Cross had read the report before it was fed into a burn barrel and turned to ash. 3 operators missing, helicopter down, behind enemy lines, presumed KIA. 6 days later, one of them walked into a forward operating base, barely alive, but carrying a USB drive with Taliban battle plans that prevented an offensive, saved 187 coalition lives. That operator had been given a new identity, new background, new life, and orders to disappear forever. Cross had read the name on that report before it burned. Lieutenant Evelyn Garrett, call sign Valkyrie. Jesus Christ, Cross said again. His junior officers looked confused. A captain and a lieutenant, both too young to have served in the early years of Afghanistan. Both looking between Cross and me, trying to figure out what had their colonel frozen. Brennan was still standing there, grinning, thinking this was all part of his show. Sir, just conducting a routine security check, new protocols about stand down corporal. Cross's voice cut through the hangar noise like a blade through silk. Every conversation that had started to resume stopped again. Every head turned. Brennan spun around, saw the eagles on Cross's shoulders, went pale. Sir, I was just following proper. I said stand down. The temperature in the hangar dropped 20 degrees. Cross walked across the concrete floor. Deliberate steps, boot heels clicking against cement, eyes never leaving my back, never leaving that tattoo. His 2 officers hung back by the door. The captain bent down, started gathering the scattered papers. The lieutenant just stood there, looking lost. Cross stopped 3 feet behind me, close enough to read every line of ink on my spine. I didn't move, didn't turn, just stood there with my arms at my sides, breathing steady, heart rate controlled. Gave him nothing. He studied the tattoo, the triangle, the numbers, the bird. I could feel the weight of his recognition, the way his understanding shifted everything, the way the casual Tuesday morning inspection had just become something else entirely. Ma'am, Cross said quietly, you can get dressed. I picked up my t-shirt from the workbench, pulled it on, no hurry, no shame, just the mechanical completion of a task that had been assigned. Pulled my coveralls back up, zipped them, straightened my collar. The whole time Cross just stood there, processing, calculating, trying to reconcile the classified report he'd read 13 years ago with the woman standing in front of him now. Wells still had his phone up, still recording, probably thinking he had viral content, probably already planning the caption. Cross turned to him. You will delete that footage immediately, or I will have you court-martialed for recording classified personnel without authorization. Wells blinked. Classified? But she's just a contractor, sir. It's just a... Delete it now, specialist. The tone in Cross's voice made Wells's hands shake. He fumbled with his phone, tapped the screen multiple times, hands trembling so badly he almost dropped it. It's deleted, sir. Show me. Wells held up his phone. Recently deleted folder. Empty. Cross wasn't satisfied. Permanently delete it. Wells tapped again. Confirmed deletion. The video disappeared into the digital void. He shoved the phone back in his pocket like it was radioactive. Cross turned to the assembled mechanics. His voice carried across the entire hangar. Everyone out! Now! Sir, we've got scheduled maintenance on 3 birds, someone started. I don't care if you've got the President of the United States scheduled for a tune-up. Clear this hangar. Anyone who discusses what just happened will be washing dishes in the mess hall until their enlistment expires. Am I clear? Yes, sir. They scattered. Brennan tried to linger, tried to explain, tried to salvage something from the wreckage of his authority. Sir, I was just following security protocol. New regulations about electromagnetic Corporal Brennan, Cross's voice was quiet now, somehow more terrifying than when he'd been shouting. Report to my office at 1400 hours. Bring your supervisor. We're going to have a conversation about what protocol actually means. Brennan's face went from pale to white. A meeting with the base commander, with his supervisor present. That usually meant paperwork, the kind that followed you for the rest of your career. Yes, sir. Dismissed. Brennan practically ran out of the hangar. When the last mechanic had cleared out, Cross turned to his two officers. Captain Morris, Lieutenant Jacobs, wait outside. Sir, if this is a security matter, shouldn't we? Captain Morris started. That's not a request. They left. The hangar doors closed behind them with a hollow boom. Now it was just me, Cross, and the empty cathedral of metal and machinery. Cross pulled out his phone, dialed a number from memory, not in any contact list, just muscle memory from having called it enough times over the years. He waited. The phone rang once, twice. Someone picked up. This is Colonel Cross at Falcon Ridge Air Station. Authorization code Delta 7 Romeo 32. I need immediate verification on a contractor named Evelyn Garrett. He listened. His expression didn't change. Yes, that's the name on file. I need background verification. Priority Alpha. More listening. His jaw tightened. I see. And the classification level. Pause. Understood. What about current operational status? Longer pause. His eyes flicked to me. Copy that. And if someone had hypothetically compromised her cover. He nodded at whatever response came through. Understood. Thank you. He ended the call, stood there for a moment, phone still in his hand, processing whatever he'd just been told. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, not at the contractor in coveralls, at the operator underneath, at the ghost who'd been walking around in plain sight for 13 years. They tell me you've got clearance I'm not allowed to ask about, he said finally. Then don't ask. But I can give you whatever you need to do your job properly. I picked up my clipboard from the workbench. I just need to finish my inspection and file my report, same as any other day. Cross studied my face, the way I stood, the way I tracked movement without appearing to watch, the scars on my knuckles that came from close quarters combat, the calluses on my hands from tools and weapons, the slight asymmetry in my shoulders from an old injury that had never quite healed right. He was seeing things most people missed, things 13 years of civilian life hadn't quite erased. Task Force Viper was decommissioned in 2012, he said quietly. Officially. The reports were all destroyed. Most of them. You're not supposed to exist. I met his eyes, calm, direct, gave him nothing. A lot of things aren't supposed to exist, Colonel. Doesn't mean they don't. He was quiet for a moment. Then, what happened in March 2011? That's classified. I read the report before it was burned. Then you know more than you're supposed to. I know a helicopter went down. I know 3 operators were declared KYA. I know 1 made it back with intelligence that saved a lot of lives. He paused. I know that operator was given a new identity and told to disappear. I didn't confirm or deny. Just stood there, clipboard in hand, waiting. Why are you here? Cross asked. Why Falcon Ridge? Because you have a Blackhawk that needs inspection. That's not what I mean. I know what you mean, Colonel, and the answer is the same. I'm here to do a job, same as any other base, same as any other Tuesday. Cross looked like he wanted to push, wanted to ask more questions, wanted to know how someone with my background ended up inspecting civilian contractors' maintenance work. But he'd made that phone call, and whoever had answered had clearly told him to back off, to provide support and ask no questions. There's a modified Raptor in Bay 3, I said quietly. Classified modifications. I shouldn't know about it, but I do. Cross went very still. How do you know about that? Because my clearance runs deeper than the paperwork shows. Because I'm here to do more than just inspect helicopters. And because you and I both know that some things can't be discussed, even between people who should be able to discuss them. He nodded slowly, understanding what I wasn't saying, that my presence at Falcon Ridge wasn't random, that someone had sent me here, that my work went beyond catching maintenance failures. What do you need from me? He asked finally. Permission to finish my inspection. Granted. Anything else? I thought about that. About Brennan and his crew, about the video that had supposedly been deleted, about the fact that my cover was blown to anyone who knew what to look for. Make sure I'm not disturbed, I said. And make sure that video is really gone. Consider it done. Cross headed toward the door, stopped, turned back. "Ma'am." "For what it's worth, thank you for your service." I didn't respond, just nodded once. He left. The hangar door closed behind him, and I was alone with my clipboard and my toolbox and the Blackhawk that still needed inspection. I stood there for a moment, just breathing, processing what had just happened. 13 years of invisibility, gone in 30 seconds. But the job still needed doing, the aircraft still needed inspection, lives still depended on me catching the small things before they became catastrophic failures. I picked up my clipboard, went back to work. Because that's what you do when you've spent 13 years trying to make 3 deaths mean something. You do the work, you catch the failures, you save the lives you can, and you don't stop. Not for embarrassment, not for exposure, not for anything. The tail rotor assembly still had that stress pattern in the mounting bracket, the one I'd found before Brennan interrupted. I documented it this time, drew a diagram, noted the exact location, recommended immediate replacement before next flight, because someone's life might depend on that recommendation, and I'd already lost too many people to equipment I should have checked more carefully. I moved through the rest of the inspection with mechanical precision. Main rotor hub, hydraulic systems, avionics mounting points, fuel lines, landing gear, every bolt, every connection, every weld, looking for the small failures that become catastrophic at altitude, the hairline cracks that propagate into structural collapse, the loose connections that become fires, the worn components that become fatal malfunctions. I found a hydraulic pump running hot, noted it, recommended replacement, found a safety wire that had worked loose on a fuel connection, fixed it myself with wire from my toolbox, found a crack in a composite panel that the regular maintenance crew had missed, documented it, flagged it for immediate repair. By the time I finished my report was 3 pages of detailed findings, technical specifications, diagrams, recommendations, the kind of report that would make experienced maintenance officers take notice, the kind of report that would save lives. I packed up my tools, gathered my clipboard, walked back to the duty station where Sergeant Kane was still working. He looked up when I approached. His eyes were different now, not quite respectful, not quite fearful, something in between, recognition maybe, of a fellow professional, of someone who'd been where he'd been and done what he'd done. I handed him the inspection report. He read it, slowly. His expression shifted from neutral to impressed to concerned as he worked through my findings. "This tail rotor issue," he said finally. "How'd you spot this without running the bird?" "Feel the mounting bracket, different stress pattern than normal wear." He shook his head. "We've been trying to track down that vibration for weeks. Diagnostics kept coming back clean." "Diagnostics don't feel metal fatigue. Hands do." Kane looked at the report again, at my signature at the bottom, those same block letters, that same precise spacing. "Where'd you learn to inspect like this, ma'am?" Places where equipment failure meant people died. That was all I gave him, all he needed. He signed off on the report, added his own notes, flagged it for immediate command review. "This is good work," he said quietly. "Real good work." "Thank you, Sergeant." I turned to leave. Made it 3 steps before Kane spoke again. "Ma'am, I just want you to know what Brennan did. That's not how we do things here, and it won't happen again." I looked back at him, this old sergeant who'd seen enough to recognize someone carrying weight. "I appreciate that, Sergeant Kane. You coming back next month for the follow-up?" I thought about that, about whether I could come back here, about whether my cover was too compromised, about whether the easiest thing would be to request reassignment somewhere else. But then I thought about that tail rotor, about the hydraulic pump, about the crack in the composite panel, about the lives that would be saved because I'd found those failures. "Yes," I said. "I'll be back." Kane nodded, something like approval in his eyes. I walked out of Hangar 7 into the afternoon heat. The sun was brutal. The tarmac shimmered. The air smelled like jet fuel and possibility. My truck was where I'd left it. Toolbox in the bed. Clipboard on the passenger seat. I sat behind the wheel for a moment, just breathing, processing. The tattoo on my back felt like it was burning, like the ink was fresh instead of 13 years old. like the weight of what it represented had gotten heavier instead of lighter. 3 people, 3 deaths, 3 sacrifices that I'd spent 13 years trying to honor. And now everyone knew, or at least everyone who mattered. I started the truck, put it in gear, drove toward the gate. The same young guard waved me through, same baby face, same belief that the world worked the way he'd been told. He had no idea what had just happened in Hangar 7. No idea that the tired-looking woman in the contractor truck had just had her past catch up with her. No idea that sometimes the people who look the most ordinary are the ones carrying the heaviest loads. I drove back toward town, toward the motel where I'd been staying for the past week, toward the temporary life I'd built while doing this inspection. But my mind was already 13 years in the past, back in Afghanistan, back in a cave in the mountains where 3 people died, trusting I'd make their sacrifice mean something. And I was wondering, not for the first time, if I'd kept that promise, if the work I did was enough, if anything could ever be enough. The desert stretched out on both sides of the highway, endless, empty, beautiful in its desolation. Kind of like me, I thought. And then I pushed that thought away, because self-pity never saved anyone. The work saved people, the inspections, the reports, the careful attention to detail that caught failures before they became catastrophes. That's what mattered. That's what I had left. I pulled into the motel parking lot as the sun started its descent toward the horizon. The Desert Vista Inn, $38 a night, clean sheets, working air conditioning, everything a ghost needed. Room 117, ground floor facing the parking lot, old habits. Always know your exits, always maintain sight lines. I grabbed my toolbox, my clipboard, locked the truck. Inside the room was exactly as I'd left it. Bed made with military corners, clothes folded and stacked, laptop on the desk, everything in its place. I set down my tools, pulled out my laptop, sat at the desk, opened the encrypted file where I kept my records. Every inspection, every finding, every recommendation, added today's report, Falcon Ridge Air Station, October 15th, 2024. Blackhawk Tail number 647, 3 critical findings, all documented, all flagged. Then I opened another file, the one I'd kept for 13 years, the one with 3 names, Captain James Corbett, Sergeant Declan Hayes, Corporal Sloan Winters. I added a note, just like I did after every inspection. Found 3 more failures today, 3 more lives saved, still making it count. I closed the laptop, sat back in the chair, closed my eyes. And for the first time in 13 years, I let myself wonder what would happen now that people knew, now that the ghost had been seen, now that the past had caught up. But I didn't have answers, just questions, and the weight of a tattoo that felt heavier than it had this morning. Tomorrow I'd drive back to the base, file my official report, maybe talk to Colonel Cross about what happens next. But tonight I was just Evelyn Garrett, 47 years old, sitting in a motel room, carrying 3 deaths and wondering if I'd ever carried them far enough. The sun set, the room grew dark, and I sat there in the shadows, still invisible, even when they'd seen everything, because some ghosts don't need to be seen to exist, they just need to keep doing the work, and I had a lot more work to do. Part 2. The next morning started like every morning for the past 13 years. 05:30, eyes open before the alarm. Old habits from a life that officially never happened. I showered, dressed, made coffee in the motel room's cheap maker. Black, no sugar. Sat at the desk and reviewed my inspection report one more time before filing it officially. 3 critical findings. Any one of them could bring down an aircraft, kill a crew, turn routine operations into disaster. The tail rotor mounting bracket with the stress fracture. Give it another 100 flight hours and the harmonic vibration would shake the assembly apart. Maybe it would happen on the ground, maybe at altitude, maybe during a combat insertion with 11 soldiers in the back, trusting their lives to maintenance they'd never see. The hydraulic pump running hot, already degrading faster than specification. Another 200 hours and it would fail completely. Loss of hydraulic pressure, loss of flight controls, loss of everything. The crack in the composite panel, Small now, hairline, but composite doesn't crack from normal stress. It cracks from impact, from damage, and once it starts, it propagates. The panel would separate, maybe take part of the airframe with it. 3 failures, 3 potential catastrophes, 3 groups of people who would never know I'd saved their lives. That's how it always worked. The people you save don't know you saved them. They just go home, live their lives, never realize how close they came. Only the dead get remembered. I closed my laptop, finished my coffee, grabbed my keys. Time to file the official report. Falcon Ridge looked different in morning light. The same heat, the same jet fuel smell, the same mechanics starting their shifts. But now I knew they were talking about me. Word spreads fast on military bases, especially word about classified contractors getting strip searched and colonels losing their minds over tattoos. I could feel eyes tracking me as I drove across the base. Nothing obvious, no pointing, no staring, just that subtle awareness that comes when you're the topic of every conversation in every break room. The gate guard waved me through without checking my ID. Yesterday, he'd been thorough. Today, he just nodded, like he'd been told to expect me. I parked in the same spot outside Hangar 7, grabbed my clipboard, left the toolbox in the truck bed. I wasn't here to inspect today, just to file paperwork. Sergeant Kane was at his duty station. He stood up when I walked in, something different in his expression. Not quite respect, not quite caution. Something between recognition and wariness. "Ma'am." He stood up. Actually stood up. Yesterday he'd stayed seated. "Colonel Cross asked me to notify him when you arrived, if you have a moment." "Of course." Kane picked up his phone, dialed an extension. "Sir, she's here." Pause. "Yes, sir." He hung up. "He's on his way." I waited, standing in the same spot where yesterday I'd signed in as just another contractor, where nobody had looked twice at me, where I'd been invisible. 2 minutes later, Colonel Cross walked into the hangar. Alone this time, no junior officers, no entourage. He looked tired, like he'd spent the night reading classified files he wasn't supposed to have access to anymore, making phone calls to people who didn't want to be called. "Ms. Garrett, thank you for coming back. Can we talk somewhere private?" "Of course, sir." He led me to a small office off the main hangar floor, probably belonged to the maintenance chief. Metal desk filing cabinets, motivational posters about safety procedures, the universal language of military offices everywhere. Cross closed the door, gestured to a chair. I sat. He stayed standing, pacing slightly, working through how to start a conversation he probably shouldn't be having. "I made some calls last night," he said finally, "after you left. Tried to understand what exactly happened in March 2011. I didn't respond, just waited. Most of the files are gone, destroyed, but I still have contacts, people who were there, people who remember." He stopped pacing, looked at me directly. "They told me you're the only one who knows the whole story, the only one who was there for all of it." "The mission is classified, sir." "I know, and I'm not asking you to violate that. I just want you to know that I understand what you did, what you carry." He paused. "And I want you to know that you're safe here. Brennan's been dealt with. The video is gone. Your cover, as much as it can be, is maintained. What happened to Brennan? 45 days extra duty, letter of reprimand in his permanent file. Mandatory training on proper treatment of personnel with classified backgrounds, and a very clear understanding that if he ever pulls something like that again, his career is over." I nodded. Fair punishment, maybe even merciful. "Thank you, sir." Cross sat down across from me, leaned forward, hands clasped. "Can I ask you something off the record you can ask? Why are you still doing this inspecting aircraft for civilian contractors? You've got clearances that go deeper than mine. You could be anywhere, doing anything. Why this?" I was quiet for a long moment, thinking about how to answer, whether to answer. Then I decided he'd earned the truth, at least part of it. Because every aircraft I inspect correctly, every failure I catch, every life I save through this work, that's me proving their deaths weren't wasted. "Whose deaths?" "The people I left behind." Cross nodded slowly. understanding what I wasn't saying. The 3 from your team. Yes, sir. You carry them with you. Every day. He was quiet, processing that. Then, the tattoo, the triangle, the numbers, the bird. That's not official designation, is it? That's personal. Yes, sir. I got it 3 days after they gave me my new identity. Against regulations, against orders. But I needed something permanent, something that couldn't be taken away with paperwork. What do they mean if you can tell me? I touched my lower back, where the ink sat under my shirt. Permanent reminder of a temporary choice that became a permanent scar. The triangle represents 3 people. The mission code speaks for itself. The bird. I paused. The bird is what they called operators who made it home alone. Ravens, scavengers, survivors who fed on the dead. That's not what you are. That's what it feels like sometimes. Cross shook his head. You saved 187 lives with the intelligence you brought back. That's not scavenging. That's sacrifice. Tell that to the 3 people who died waiting for me to come back. And there it was. The weight I'd been carrying for 13 years, out in the open, spoken to someone who might actually understand. Cross leaned back in his chair. You know what I think? I think you've been punishing yourself for 13 years for making the right choice. I think you've been living like a ghost because you feel guilty for surviving. And I think it's time you stopped. With respect, sir, you don't know what happened out there. Then tell me. It's classified. I'm cleared. Not for this. We sat in silence for a moment. The air conditioning hummed. Somewhere in the distance, an engine started up. I read your inspection report, Cross said, changing subject. 3 critical findings, any one of them catastrophic. How did you spot things our regular maintenance crew missed? I know what to look for. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have, sir. When you've seen equipment fail in combat, you learn to recognize the warning signs. The small things that become big things. You develop a sense for it. Cross studied me. Master Sergeant Thorne told me you found the tail rotor issue by touch, that you felt the stress pattern in the metal. That's not standard inspection procedure. Standard procedures don't catch everything. No, they don't. He stood up. I'm making your report mandatory reading for every mechanic on this base. They need to see what real competence looks like. They need to understand that this job isn't about checking boxes. It's about keeping people alive. That's not necessary, sir. Yes, it is, because what Brennan did yesterday, that can't happen again. Not just the humiliation, the assumption, the idea that someone quiet must be weak, that someone older must be irrelevant, that someone civilian must be incompetent. He opened the office door. You're teaching them a lesson they need to learn, even if you don't want to. Master Sergeant Vincent Thorne was waiting in the hangar when we came out. 56 years old, graying hair, hands that had touched more aircraft than most pilots would ever fly. He approached when he saw me, direct, no hesitation. Ma'am, I wanted to apologize for yesterday. What happened? I should have stepped in sooner. You're not responsible for Corporal Brennan's actions, Sergeant. Maybe not, but I'm responsible for the culture in this hangar, and what happened yesterday tells me our culture needs work. He paused. I also wanted to thank you for that inspection report. The findings you documented. I've been chasing that tail rotor vibration for 3 weeks with every diagnostic tool we have. You found it in 5 minutes. Experienced sergeant, that's all. No, ma'am. That's expertise. There's a difference. He pulled out a tablet. I was wondering if you had time this morning. I'd like you to show me how you diagnose those issues. Not for my ego, for training. So I can teach the younger mechanics what to look for. I glanced at Cross. He nodded slightly. Approval. I have time, I said. Thorne led me to the Black Hawk in Bay 7, the same bird I'd inspected yesterday. He'd already flagged all 3 of my findings with red tags. Safety protocol. Don't fly until issues are resolved. The tail rotor, Dal, he said. Show me what you felt. I knelt by the mounting bracket, placed my hand on the housing. Feel here, the vibration frequency. It's subtle, but it's different from the main rotor harmonics. Thorne knelt beside me, put his hand where mine had been, closed his eyes, concentrated. After a moment, I feel it. Jesus, How did I miss that? Because you were using instruments. Instruments measure what they're designed to measure. But metal stress creates patterns instruments don't always catch. You have to feel it. Where did you learn to do that? Overseas, maintaining aircraft in environments where diagnostic equipment wasn't reliable. Sand in the electronics, extreme temperatures, you learned to trust your hands more than your tools. Afghanistan. I didn't answer, just moved to the hydraulic pump. This one, I said, put your hand on the housing, feel the heat differential between the primary and secondary pumps. Thorne did. His eyes widened slightly. The secondary's running maybe 10 degrees hotter. I saw that in the readings, but it was within spec. Within spec for now, but it's degrading faster than it should. Metal expansion is asymmetric. Feel the mounting points. The stress is uneven. Thorne traced his fingers along the mounting bracket. You're right. The port side mounting is taking more load. The pump's vibrating off-axis. Give it another 200 hours and it'll seize. Maybe catastrophically, maybe just fail. Either way, loss of hydraulic pressure at the wrong moment means loss of aircraft. Thorne sat back on his heels. 32 years I've been doing this. 32 years. And you just taught me something I should have known. You knew it, you just weren't trusting what you felt over what the instruments told you. Where did you serve, ma'am, if you don't mind me asking? I do mind. Fair enough. He stood, brushed dust off his coveralls. But whoever trained you, they trained you right. And I'm grateful you're putting that training to use, keeping our birds safe. It's just a job, Sergeant. No, ma'am. A job is something you do for a paycheck. What you're doing, that's something else. That's making sure people go home to their families. I didn't respond to that, because he was closer to the truth than he knew. And the truth was complicated. By noon, word of the training session had spread. 3 more senior NCOs showed up wanting to understand how I'd found the issues their crews had missed. I walked them through the same process. Hands-on diagnostic, feeling for patterns, trusting tactile information over digital readouts. They listened. They learned. They treated me with the careful respect people give to experts whose credentials they don't fully understand but can't deny. It was exhausting, not physically, but emotionally. Being visible after so long being invisible. Being known after so long being forgotten. By 1300 hours, I needed a break. I walked outside, found a patch of shade behind the hangar, sat on a concrete parking barrier, closed my eyes, just breathed. The desert heat was brutal even in shade. But I'd learned to live with heat. Afghanistan had been hot too. Different hot. Dry heat that sucked moisture from your lungs. That made you understand why empires fell trying to conquer these landscapes. I pulled out my phone, opened the encrypted folder where I kept the only photos I had from before. Not of missions, not of operations, just of people. Captain James Corbett, Georgia drawl, 3 kids back home, wife named Sarah who sent care packages with homemade cookies and love letters written on notebook paper. He'd shown me photos once, kids in Little League uniforms, wife smiling on their front porch, normal life waiting for him. Sergeant Declan Hayes, Boston accent so thick you could barely understand him when he got excited. Engaged to marry in June 2011. Her name was Kate, teacher, elementary school. He carried her picture in his helmet, talked about the house they'd buy, the family they'd start. Corporal Sloan Winters, Wyoming ranch girl, quietest person I'd ever met, could go days without saying more than necessary. But when she did speak, people listened. She'd grown up on horseback, learned to shoot before she learned to read. Had a brother with Down syndrome she sent money to every month. 3 people, 3 lives, 3 futures that ended in a cave in the Afghan mountains. Because I made a choice, the right choice, Cross had said. The necessary choice, the choice that saved 187 other lives. But sitting there in the shade behind Hangar 7 13 years and 7 months later, it still felt like the wrong choice. Because I could remember Corbett's face when he gave me the order. The way he was crying, not from pain, from having to choose between his team and the mission. I could remember Hayes pressing his dog tags into my hand, the weight of them, the warmth from his body heat, the way his voice shook when he said, "Make it mean something." I could remember Winters gripping my wrist, barely conscious, barely alive, whispering, "Don't look back," with breath that smelled like blood and failure, and I'd left them. I'd walked out of that cave at midnight on March 17th, 2011, carrying 3 sets of dog tags and 1 USB drive that contained Taliban battle plans. I'd killed 3 enemy combatants to retrieve that drive. I'd run 80 kilometers through hostile territory with an infected wound and no food and water I'd filtered through my shirt. I'd crawled into Forward Operating Base Shank on March 22nd at 06:15 hours, covered in blood and dirt and the weight of 3 deaths. I'd handed the USB drive to a major I didn't know and said, "Task Force Viper sends regards," before I collapsed. And when I woke up 3 days later in a field hospital, they told me my team was dead. Declared KIA. Bodies never recovered. They told me the intelligence I'd brought back had prevented a major Taliban offensive. They told me 187 coalition soldiers were alive because of what I'd done. They told me I was a hero. And all I could think was I left them to die alone. "Ma'am?" I opened my eyes. Thorne was standing there, careful, like approaching a spooked horse. "Sorry to disturb you, but there's someone here who'd like to speak with you, if you're willing." "Who?" "Senior Airman Calloway. He was there yesterday, during the incident." I closed my phone, stood up. "All right." Calloway was waiting inside the hangar, 25 years old, the one who'd recognized my tattoo yesterday, who'd gone white when he understood what Brennan had done. He stood at attention when I approached, formal, correct. "Ma'am, I wanted to apologize for yesterday. I should have stopped it, should have said something before it went as far as it did." "You're not responsible for Corporal Brennan's actions, Airman." "Maybe not, but I knew. I saw your tattoo and I knew what it meant. My grandfather served in Desert Storm, Special Operations. Before he died, he showed me photos, unit insignias that didn't exist in official records. He told me about the people who did jobs nobody could acknowledge." Calloway's voice was quiet. "He told me you could always recognize them, the way they moved, the way they watched everything without seeming to, the way they carried weight nobody else could see. Your grandfather sounds like he was a smart man. He was, and he taught me to respect people who'd been where he'd been, even if I'd never know exactly where that was." Calloway met my eyes. "I recognized your tattoo, ma'am. I knew. And I didn't stop it. That's on me." "What would you have done differently?" Airman stood up to a superior NCO in front of his crew. "Challenged authority you're not supposed to challenge." "I don't know. Something. Anything." I studied him. This young airman who was learning that knowing the right thing and doing the right thing aren't always the same. "You want to make it right?" I asked. "Yes, ma'am." "Then learn from it. And the next time you see someone being treated like they don't matter, someone quiet, someone older, someone who looks like they're just there to do a job, remember that you don't know their story. You don't know what they've survived. You don't know what they carry." "Yes, ma'am." "And teach that to the people who come after you. Pass it down. Make sure the next generation doesn't make the same mistakes." "I will, ma'am, I promise." He saluted. I returned it. He left. Thorne had been standing nearby, listening. "That's the second time today you've turned a teaching moment into something bigger," he said. "I'm not trying to teach anyone anything, Sergeant." "I know. That's what makes it effective." He paused. "Can I ask you something, and you can tell me it's none of my business?" "You can ask." "That tattoo, the 3 people it represents. You carry them every day, don't you? Everything you do, every inspection you run, every aircraft you clear for flight, you're doing it for them." I didn't answer for a long moment. Then, "Sergeant Thorne, I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone, and you're going to keep it to yourself. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." I didn't just lose 3 teammates in Afghanistan. I left them to die. I followed orders and walked away while they were still alive, and when I came back with an extraction team, they were dead, executed, burned, gone. I could hear my voice getting rough, pushed through it anyway. So yes, I carry them, every single day, because if I'd made a different choice, maybe they'd still be alive. Thorne was quiet. Then, or maybe 200 other people would be dead. I know the math, Sergeant. Believe me, I know the math. 3 for 187. That's a good trade. That's the right choice. That's what any competent officer would do. But it doesn't feel right. No, it feels like I killed them. You didn't. You followed orders. You completed the mission. You saved lives. I know. I took a breath. Doesn't change how it feels. Thorne nodded slowly. My father served in the First Gulf War, tank commander. His unit got hit during the Highway of Death engagement. He pulled 3 men out of burning vehicles, lost 2 others because he couldn't get to them in time. He paused. He spent the last 20 years of his life wondering if he'd tried harder, moved faster, been stronger if those 2 would have made it, even though everyone told him he did everything possible, even though he saved 3 lives. He carried those 2 deaths until the day he died. What's your point, Sergeant? My point is that the people who carry the dead are usually the ones who fought the hardest to keep them alive, and punishing yourself for surviving doesn't honor their sacrifice. Living well does. Doing good work does. Making sure their deaths meant something does. That's what I'm trying to do. I know, ma'am, but maybe it's time you also tried forgiving yourself. I didn't have an answer for that, because forgiveness felt like betrayal, like saying their deaths were acceptable, like moving on when they couldn't. So I just nodded, said, "I'll think about it, Sergeant," and went back to work. The rest of the afternoon was meetings. Cross wanted me to brief his maintenance officers on advanced diagnostic techniques, wanted me to review safety protocols, wanted me to consult on 3 other aircraft that had been flagged for potential issues. I did it all, professional, competent, gave them what they needed. But by 1700 hours, I was done, exhausted, ready to disappear back into invisibility. I was walking to my truck when I saw him, Corporal Brennan, standing by the hangar entrance, waiting. He saw me, hesitated, then walked over. "Ma'am, I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but I wanted to apologize properly. Not because Colonel Cross ordered me to, because I need to." I stopped, waited. "What I did yesterday was wrong," Brennan continued. "Not just against regulations. Wrong. I humiliated you. I abused my authority. I treated you like you were nothing." He paused. "And then I found out who you really were, what you'd done. And I realized I'd done all of that to someone who'd sacrificed more than I could imagine. You didn't know. That's the point, ma'am. I didn't know. And I didn't care to know. I just assumed. Assumed you were weak because you were quiet. Assumed you were irrelevant because you were older. Assumed you didn't matter because you were just a contractor. And now you know different. Now I know I'm an idiot who almost destroyed his career and dishonored someone who deserved respect." Brennan's voice was shaking slightly. "I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to come back next month for the follow-up inspection, and I wanted to promise that you'll be treated with the professionalism you should have received yesterday." I looked at this kid, 22 years old, learning a hard lesson about assumptions and consequences. "Corporal Brennan, can I ask you something?" "Yes, ma'am." "Why did you do it, really? What was going through your head when you demanded I strip?" He was quiet for a moment, wrestling with whether to be honest. "I'd had a bad week," he said finally. "Failed my certification test, got chewed out by my supervisor, watched my friends get promoted while I stayed at the same rank, and I wanted to feel bigger than I was feeling, wanted to prove I had authority, that I mattered, by making someone else feel small." "Yes, ma'am. And I'm ashamed of that, more ashamed than I've ever been of anything." "Good. Use that shame. Let it teach you something." "What should it teach me?" I thought about that, about all the lessons I'd learned the hard way, about the weight of choices and the cost of assumptions. That real authority doesn't come from making people feel small. It comes from making them feel valued. That real strength isn't about dominating others, it's about lifting them up. And that the people who matter most are often the ones who say the least. Brennan nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I'll remember that. Will I see you next month? If you're willing to come back." "I'm willing, Corporal. The aircraft still needs inspection. Lives still depend on the work being done right. My feelings don't change that." "Thank you, ma'am." He saluted. I returned it. He walked away, and I realized something. The kid was going to be okay. He'd made a mistake, a big one, but he was learning from it, growing, becoming someone better. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was how you honored the dead. Not just by doing good work, but by teaching others to do good work, by passing down the lessons, by making sure the next generation didn't repeat the same mistakes. Maybe Thorne was right. Maybe living well and doing good work and teaching others was how you made the sacrifice mean something. Maybe. I drove back to the motel as the sun started its descent toward the horizon. The Desert Vista Inn looked exactly the same as every other night. Same parking lot, same flickering neon sign, same worn paint. But I felt different. For 13 years I'd been invisible, ghost, existing in the spaces between notice and memory, doing my work and disappearing before anyone looked too close. Yesterday, that ended. Brennan had pulled back the curtain. Cross had seen what was underneath. And now people knew. Not everything, but enough. Enough to change how they looked at me. Enough to change how I moved through the world. Enough that invisibility wasn't an option anymore. I parked in my usual spot, room 117, ground floor. Sight lines to the parking lot. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it. Bed made with military corners, laptop on the desk, everything in its place. I sat down, opened the laptop, checked my encrypted email. One new message, from a sender with no name, just an alphanumeric code I recognized. I opened it. We're aware of the situation at Falcon Ridge. Your cover remains intact at the highest levels. Continue your work. Report filed and noted. Well done. M. I closed the laptop, so Washington knew. Whoever monitored people like me had been notified, assessed the situation, decided I was still useful where I was. That should have felt reassuring. Instead, it felt like a leash tightening. But I'd known what I was signing up for when I took the new identity, when I accepted the deal that kept me out of official records and free to work in the places where I could do the most good. I'd traded one kind of service for another, one kind of invisibility for another, and I'd do it again. Because the alternative was doing nothing, and I couldn't do nothing. Not while people were still dying from preventable failures. Not while aircraft were still flying with cracks in their panels and stress in their mounting brackets and pumps running hot. Not while I still carried 3 sets of dog tags and the weight of choices I couldn't undo. I pulled out my phone, opened the photo folder again. Corbett, Hayes, Winters, 3 faces I saw every night before I closed my eyes. 3 voices I heard in quiet moments. 3 deaths that had bought 187 lives. I pressed my fingers to the phone screen where their faces smiled back at me. 3 people who'd trusted me with their last breaths. 3 sacrifices I carried forward every single day. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Then instinct said, answer it. So I did. Garrett. Ms. Garrett, this is Colonel Nathan Cross. I apologize for calling so late, but I had a conversation earlier this evening with Sergeant Kane after you left. He mentioned something interesting. He said he recognized your signature yesterday, when you signed in. I didn't respond. Waited. He served with Captain James Corbett, Iraq 2006, 15 months in Ramadi. They kept in touch after. Kane says Corbett talked about having a teammate, female, special operations. Called her the best soldier he'd ever served with. My throat tightened. Kane says he recognized your handwriting because Corbett showed him a letter once that you'd written. Apparently Corbett kept it in his footlocker. Considered it good luck. I didn't know that. Kane wants you to know that he made sure you weren't bothered yesterday, that he kept an eye on you, that he would have stepped in sooner if he'd known what Brennan was planning. He feels responsible, wants to apologize. That's not necessary, sir. He also wants you to know that Corbett talked about you right up until his last deployment. Said you were the kind of soldier who made everyone around you better, who led by example, who never asked anyone to do something you wouldn't do yourself. I couldn't speak, couldn't find words. Cross was quiet for a moment, then, I thought you should know that, ma'am, that the people you served with, they knew what you were worth. They trusted you, they respected you, and they wouldn't want you spending the rest of your life punishing yourself for making the choice they told you to make. Thank you, sir. Get some rest, Ms. Garrett. I'll see you next month for the follow-up inspection. He hung up. I sat there in the dark motel room, phone in my hand, tears on my face for the second time in 13 years. Corbett had kept my letter, had talked about me, had considered me someone worth remembering, and I'd left him to die alone in a cave on the other side of the world. The weight of that would never go away, the guilt would never fully lift, the questions would never stop. But maybe, just maybe, Thorne was right. Maybe living well and doing good work and teaching others was how you honored the dead. Maybe it was time I tried. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe never, but acceptance, that the choice had been made, that it couldn't be unmade, that the only way forward was through the work, the inspections, the reports, the lives saved, one aircraft at a time, one failure caught, one catastrophe prevented, for Corbett, for Hayes, for Winters, for the 187 who got to go home, for all of them. I wiped my eyes, closed my phone, stood up. Tomorrow I'd drive to the next assignment, the next base, the next aircraft that needed inspection. And I'd do the work, like I always did, like I always would, because that's what you do when you're a ghost. You haunt the places where you're needed, you save the people you can, and you carry the ones you couldn't, forever. But first, I needed to understand what had happened in that cave. I opened my laptop again. Not the encrypted files, not the inspection reports, the personal file, the one I'd never shared with anyone, the one where I kept the truth. Afghanistan, March 2011. Let me tell you what really happened. Afghanistan, March 2011. We called it Operation Nightfall, 4 operators, 72-hour window. Extract intelligence that could save 200 lives. Task Force Viper didn't officially exist. We were ghosts before we died. Operators pulled from different units, given new call signs, sent to do the jobs that couldn't be acknowledged. Captain James Corbett, call sign Reaper, team leader, 36 years old, 3 tours under his belt, the kind of officer who led from the front and brought everyone home. Sergeant Declan Hayes, call sign Doc, medic, 32, engagement ring in his pocket, planned to propose when he got home. Always said the right thing to keep morale up. Corporal Sloan Winters, call sign Phantom, sniper, 28, could shoot the wings off a fly at 800 meters. Quietest person I'd ever met. When she spoke, you listened. And me. Lieutenant Evelyn Garrett, call sign Valkyrie, 34, communications and intel specialist, the one who was supposed to get us in and get us out. The insertion was supposed to be routine. Black Hawk flight, 20 minutes to the landing zone, fast rope down, hike 3 clicks to the target compound, retrieve the hard drive with Taliban offensive plans. Extraction at dawn. Simple, until the RPG hit us. I don't remember the impact, just the noise. The way the world became fire and metal and spinning horizon. The pilot fought it. I'll give him credit. He fought that bird all the way down. But physics doesn't care about training. We hit the mountainside at 60 knots. The cockpit crumpled like a beer can. Both pilots died instantly. Probably didn't even know it happened. I woke up wedged between the bulkhead and a cargo net. My thigh was on fire. Shrapnel. My shoulder was dislocated, but I was alive. Sound off, Corbett's voice, strained but steady. Doc here, conscious, mobile. Phantom here, head trauma, vision blurry. Valkyrie here, wounded but functional. I pulled myself out of the wreckage. Inventory time, what we had, what we didn't. Corbett, both legs broken, compound fractures, protruding bone, could barely sit up without screaming. But he was still giving orders. Hayes' internal bleeding. I could see it in his eyes, the way he was holding his side. He had maybe 48 hours without surgery. Winter's severe head trauma. Blood pooling under her scalp. Kept drifting in and out of consciousness. Me shrapnel wound, dislocated shoulder. But I could move. I could fight. The mission objective was 2 kilometers away. The hard drive with Taliban offensive plans. The intelligence that could save 200 coalition soldiers. But we were behind enemy lines. No comms, no extraction, no backup, and my team was dying. Valkyrie, Corbett's voice, command voice. Even with broken legs, even knowing he was dying, he was still the captain. You need to complete the mission. Sir, we need to find shelter, stabilize, call for extraction. Comms are dead. Helo's a loss. Taliban will be here in hours. He grimaced, pushed through the pain. You know what you have to do. I can get everyone to shelter. We can... Hayes has 48 hours. Winters might have less. I can't walk. He looked at me, eyes clear, certain. 3 of us are combat ineffective. You're the only one who can complete the mission. And if you don't, 200 soldiers die. I'm not leaving you. That's not a request, Lieutenant. That's an order. Hayes was conscious enough to understand. He pressed his dog tags into my hand. Please, make it mean something. Winters gripped my wrist, barely able to focus. Don't look back. Captain, there has to be another way. Corbett was crying now, not from pain, from having to make this choice. I'm giving you a direct order, Valkyrie. Complete the mission. Leave us. Save the 200. Sir. That's an order, goddammit, he was shouting now, tears streaming down his face. You go. You get that intelligence. You make sure we didn't die for nothing. You understand me. I understood. I understood that he was right. That 3 combat ineffective operators couldn't complete the mission. That someone had to survive to get the intelligence out. That 200 lives outweighed 3. I understood the math. But understanding didn't make it hurt less. I left at midnight, March 17th, 2011, carrying 3 sets of dog tags, Corbett's, Hayes's, Winters's. They felt heavier than my rifle. I hiked 2 kilometers through hostile territory to the crash site of a Taliban intelligence officer's helicopter, the one we'd been sent to raid, the one that had the hard drive. Taliban were already there. 3 guards, probably thought they were safe, probably didn't expect a half-dead American operator to come crawling out of the mountains. I killed all 3, close quarters, knife work, quick and silent, retrieved the hard drive from the wreckage, then I ran, 80 kilometers to the nearest forward operating base, infected thigh wound, dislocated shoulder, no food, water filtered through my shirt from streams I passed. 3 days, 72 hours of running and hiding and bleeding. I made it to FOB Shank on March 22nd at 06:15. Handed the hard drive to a major whose name I never learned. Said, Task Force Viper sends regards. Then I collapsed. I woke up 3 days later in a field hospital. They told me my team was dead, bodies not recovered, presumed executed by Taliban forces. They told me the intelligence prevented a major offensive. 187 coalition soldiers lived because of what I'd brought back. They told me I was a hero. I asked about extraction, about going back for the bodies. They said no, too dangerous. Taliban controlled the area now. My teammates were gone. I asked if I could attend the memorial service. They said there wouldn't be one. Task Force Viper didn't exist. The mission never happened. My teammates never died because they were never there. I asked what happened to me now. They said I'd get a new identity, new life, disappear, never speak of this again. I asked if I'd done the right thing. Nobody answered that question. But here's what they didn't tell me. Here's what I found out years later. What I've never told anyone. I did go back. 5 days after I woke up in that hospital, I convinced a captain I'd saved once in Kandahar to fly me back to the cave where I'd left my team. Against orders, against protocol, against every regulation in the book. We landed at dawn. I ran to the cave. They were dead, all 3 of them. Executed. Single gunshot to the head, Taliban style. The cave had been burned, bodies partially charred, but I could still see their faces. Corbett still had that look of command. Even dead, he looked like he was giving orders. Hayes, engagement ring still in his pocket, never got to propose. Winters, eyes closed, almost peaceful. They'd been alive when I left. I knew because I'd heard them calling for me that first night, heard their voices in the darkness, thought it was my imagination. It wasn't. They'd survived 3 more days, waiting, hoping, believing I'd come back with extraction, And when Taliban found them, they'd fought. I could see the brass casings. The blood that wasn't theirs. They'd gone down fighting, but they'd gone down. And I wasn't there. I dragged their bodies out of that cave, all 3 of them, loaded them on the helicopter, flew them back to FOB Shank, demanded a proper burial. The captain who'd helped me said I'd be court-martialed, that I'd exposed a classified operation, that I'd disobeyed direct orders. I told him I didn't care. A general showed up 6 hours later, the kind of general whose name you don't say out loud. He looked at the 3 bodies, looked at me, made a decision. "This never happened," he said. "These operators died in a training accident. You were never here. You never flew back. You understand?" "Yes, sir." "But," he paused, "they'll be buried at Arlington, with honors, training accident designation. Their families will know they died serving their country. They won't know the details, but they'll know their sacrifice mattered. Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me, Lieutenant. You just ended your military career. Task Force Viper is dissolved. You get a new identity, and you never speak of this again, to anyone, ever." "Yes, sir." "One more thing." He pulled out a folder. "This is the after-action report. It says you completed the mission, brought back the intelligence, saved 187 lives. It doesn't say you went back for your team. It doesn't say they survived 3 days after you left. It says they died in the initial crash." "That's a lie, sir." "That's the truth that matters, Lieutenant. You made the right choice. You completed the mission. You saved lives. What happened after that's just pain. And pain doesn't change the math." He was wrong. Pain changes everything. I got the tattoo 3 days after they gave me my new identity papers. Evelyn Garrett, 47 years old, not 34. Civilian contractor, not lieutenant. The tattoo artist in the VA hospital asked what it meant. I didn't tell him. The triangle for 3 people I left behind. The mission code for the choice I made. The bird for the one who survived when she shouldn't have. But also permanent reminder, burned into my skin. Can't be taken away with paperwork. Every morning I wake up, I feel that tattoo. Every night before I sleep, I remember their faces. Corbett crying as he gave me the order. Hayes pressing his tags into my hand. Winters whispering, "Don't look back." And I think about the math. 3 for 187. Good trade, right choice, what any competent officer would do. But it doesn't feel right. It feels like I killed them. Because maybe if I'd stayed, we all would have died. But we would have died together. Or maybe if I'd been faster, if I'd gotten the intelligence quicker, if I'd brought extraction sooner, maybe they'd still be alive. I'll never know. All I know is I left them. They died alone. And I've spent 13 years trying to make that mean something. Every aircraft I inspect, every failure I catch, every life I save, that's for them. That's my penance. That's how I keep from drowning in the weight of that choice. I closed the laptop, sat in the dark motel room. Tomorrow I'd drive to Naval Air Station Coronado, inspect Super Hornets, find more failures, save more lives. For Corbett, for Hayes, for Winters, always for them. Because that's what you do when you're the one who survived. You make it count. Every damn day. Part 3. 3 weeks passed like water through fingers. I finished the Falcon Ridge assignment, filed my final reports, watched as maintenance crews implemented every one of my recommendations. The tail rotor mounting bracket got replaced. The hydraulic pump got swapped out. The composite panel got repaired and reinforced. 3 failures caught, 3 catastrophes prevented, 3 crews who would never know how close they'd come. That's the work. That's what matters. Colonel Cross called me twice during those 3 weeks. Once to confirm the repairs had been completed to specification. Once to tell me that Corporal Brennan had requested additional training in advanced diagnostic techniques. Wanted to learn how to inspect the way I did. Wanted to be better, good kid Cross said. Made a mistake, but he's learning from it. I hoped that was true. Master Sergeant Thorne called me once. Asked if I'd be willing to do a training session when I came back for the follow-up inspection. Teach his crew the hands-on diagnostic methods I'd shown him. Pass down the knowledge. I said yes, because that's part of the work too. Teaching, passing it on, making sure the next generation is better than we were. Senior Airman Calloway sent me an email, short, direct. Said he'd talked to his mother about what happened. She'd served too, Army Desert Storm, and she'd told him that the people who carry the most weight are usually the ones who say the least about it. He said he'd remember that, said he was sorry again, said he'd make sure his generation did better. I believed him. Sergeant Kane didn't contact me directly, but Cross mentioned that Kane had requested permission to attend a memorial service for 3 soldiers who died in Afghanistan in March 2011. Training accident official records said Cross had approved the request. I didn't ask how Kane knew about the service, didn't ask how he'd connected those deaths to me. Some things you don't need to confirm out loud. But knowing he was there, knowing someone besides me was standing at that wall in Arlington, paying respects to people the world had forgotten, that meant something. That meant I wasn't carrying them alone anymore. The motel in California was nicer than the one in Arizona. $42 a night instead of $38, working Wi-Fi, continental breakfast in the morning. Naval Air Station Coronado was different from Falcon Ridge. Ocean instead of desert. Salt air instead of dust. But the work was the same. Super Hornets instead of Blackhawks, different aircraft, different systems, same principles, metal stress, hydraulic pressure, vibration patterns, the small failures that become catastrophic if you don't catch them. I signed in at the duty station on October 23, 2024. Young sailor at the desk, maybe 21, fresh from technical school. Still believed the Navy was adventure and honor and everything the recruiters promised. Structural assessment on Super Hornet tail numbers 401 through 405, I said. 5 aircraft over 3 days. He checked his computer, looked at my credentials, handed them back without comment. Bay 12 through 16, ma'am. Senior Chief Ramos will be your liaison. He's expecting you. Thank you. I grabbed my toolbox, walked across the hangar floor. This facility was bigger than Falcon Ridge, more personnel, more aircraft, more money. Everything cleaner, newer, more expensive. Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Ramos was 52 years old, 28 years in the Navy. Started as an aviation mechanic, worked his way up to senior enlisted leadership. The kind of NCO who knew every system on every aircraft and could fix problems with baling wire and creative profanity. He saw me coming, stood up from where he'd been reviewing maintenance logs. Ms. Garrett. That's right. We shook hands. His grip was firm, confident, the handshake of someone who knew his value. Heard about you from Colonel Cross at Falcon Ridge, Ramos said. He sent over your inspection reports, said you found 3 critical failures his regular maintenance crew had missed, said you did it with your hands instead of instruments. Experienced senior chief, that's all. That's not all. That's expertise. There's a difference. He gestured toward the line of Super Hornets. These birds deploy to carrier in 6 weeks. I need to know they won't fail our pilots when it matters most. Not just pass inspection, actually be safe. I'll find whatever there is to find. Good. I looked at him. This senior chief who understood what the work actually meant. That's what I do, I said quietly. The first Super Hornet was tail number 401. $50 million of composite materials, titanium airframe, and avionics systems, so advanced they were still partially classified. Designed to launch from an aircraft carrier deck, fly combat missions, land on a pitching ship in the middle of the ocean. Do it all again tomorrow, if everything worked perfectly. My job was to make sure everything worked perfectly. I started with the landing gear, struts, hydraulics, door mechanisms, running my hands along every connection point, feeling for stress, looking for cracks, checking torque on bolts that held together systems that experienced forces most people couldn't imagine. Found the first issue within 20 minutes. The nose gear strut had a microscopic crack in the titanium housing, hairline, barely visible even with a magnifying glass. But I felt it. The way the metal flexed slightly different under pressure, the way stress had propagated through the crystalline structure. Give it another 50 carrier landings, 50 controlled crashes into arresting cables at 140 knots, And that crack would propagate. The strut would fail. The nose gear would collapse. Maybe on the deck. Embarrassing but survivable. Maybe on approach. Catastrophic. Fatal. I documented it, drew a diagram, noted the exact location, recommended immediate replacement before carrier qualification. Ramos came over when he saw me making notes. Find something. Nose gear strut, stress crack, here. I pointed to the location. Impossible to see without magnification, but you can feel it if you know what to look for. Ramos knelt down, examined the strut, pulled out a magnifying glass, looked closer. Jesus, I see it. Barely. How the hell did you spot this practice senior chief? He stood up, looked at me with new respect. That crack would have failed during carrier ops, probably during landing. Pilot would have survived, but the aircraft would be totaled, $40 million and 6 months of repair time. Or the pilot wouldn't have survived. Or that. He made notes on his tablet. What else? I've only been at this for 20 minutes. Give me time. By the end of day 1, I'd found 7 issues across 2 aircraft. The nose gear crack, a hydraulic line with early signs of fatigue, a bolt on the tail hook assembly that had been over-torqued, a crack in a wing mounting bracket, 2 avionics connections that weren't seated properly, and a fuel line that had been rubbing against a control cable wearing through the protective sheath. Any one of them could cause problems. Several of them could cause catastrophic failures. Ramos reviewed my findings with the kind of intensity that came from understanding what was at stake. This fuel line, he said, another week and it would have worn through completely. Fuel leak in the engine bay. That's a fire waiting to happen. Or an explosion. Or that. He looked up from the tablet. You just saved us an aircraft and probably a pilot. First day on the job. Just doing the work, Senior Chief. No, ma'am, you're doing it right. There's a difference. He called his maintenance crews together, briefed them on my findings, explained exactly what I'd caught and why it mattered. This is the standard, he said, holding up my inspection report. This is what competence looks like. I want every one of you to study this report, understand the methodology, learn to inspect the way Ms. Garrett inspects. The mechanics looked at me with curiosity. This middle-aged civilian woman who'd found things they'd missed, who worked with her hands instead of instruments, who spoke quietly but carried weight. One of them raised his hand. Young petty officer, maybe 23. Ma'am, how do you do it? The tactile inspection. Where did you learn that? I could have deflected, could have said it was just experience, just practice, but these kids deserved the truth, or at least part of it. I learned it maintaining aircraft in combat zones, I said, places where diagnostic equipment wasn't reliable, where sand and heat and extreme conditions meant you had to trust your hands more than your tools, where equipment failure didn't just mean mission failure, it meant people died. The hangar was quiet. So I learned to feel for stress patterns, to recognize metal fatigue by touch, to identify problems before instruments could measure them, because the alternative was sending people into situations where their aircraft would fail them, and I wasn't willing to do that. Where did you serve, ma'am? Another mechanic asked. Places I can't talk about. Doing work I'm not allowed to discuss. But the principles are the same whether you're working in a combat zone or a naval air station. Lives depend on your work, so you do it right, every time, no exceptions. Ramos nodded. You heard the lady. Lives depend on the work, so we do it right. That night in the motel, I opened my laptop, checked my encrypted email, one new message, same alphanumeric sender as before. Excellent work at NAS Coronado. 7 findings in 2 aircraft. Keep it up. Next assignment, TBD. Stay ready. M. I closed the laptop, sat back in the cheap desk chair. Someone was watching, monitoring, assessing. I was still useful, still doing work that mattered to people whose names I'd never know. That should have bothered me, the surveillance, the lack of privacy, the sense that every move I made was being evaluated. But I'd accepted this life, traded one kind of service for another. And as long as I was saving lives, as long as I was doing work that mattered, I could live with being watched. I could live with a lot of things if it meant the work continued. Day 2 at Coronado was more of the same. Aircraft 403 and 404. More inspections. More findings. A cracked composite panel on the vertical stabilizer. Stress fractures in 2 wing-mounted hardpoints. A hydraulic actuator that was wearing unevenly. 3 more avionics connections that weren't properly seated. Each one documented. Each one flagged. Each one preventing a potential failure. By evening, Ramos had pulled me aside. "I need to ask you something," he said, off the record. "All right." "Colonel Cross mentioned you had a situation at Falcon Ridge, said a young NCO got out of line, humiliated you in front of his crew, and that when the colonel saw what happened, he recognized something about you." I didn't respond, just waited. "Cross wouldn't tell me what he recognized, said it was classified. But he said I should treat you with the same respect I'd give to any senior special operations veteran. Said you'd earned it 10 times over. Colonel Cross is kind. Colonel Cross is careful with his words. He wouldn't say that unless he meant it." Ramos paused. "I'm not asking you to tell me what you did or where you served. I'm just asking if there's anything my crew needs to know. Anything that would help us work with you better." I thought about that. About what to say, what to share. "Tell your crew this," I said finally. "I'm here to make sure aircraft are safe, that's all. I don't need special treatment, I don't need accommodation, I just need to do my job without interference. And in return, I'll make sure every aircraft I clear is actually airworthy, not paperwork airworthy, actually safe. That's all. That's all." Ramos nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But if anyone gives you problems, if anyone treats you with anything less than professional respect, you tell me, immediately." "I can handle myself, Senior Chief." "I'm sure you can. But you shouldn't have to, not here, not on my watch." That meant more than he probably knew. Day 3 was the last aircraft, tail number 405. I'd saved this one for last because the maintenance logs showed it had the most flight hours, the most carrier landings, the most combat deployments. Old birds sometimes had the most problems. Or sometimes they were the most reliable because they'd been maintained obsessively. This one was somewhere in between. I found the usual issues. Worn components, stress fractures, connections that needed attention. But then I found something else, a modification to the fuel system that wasn't in the official documentation. Someone had rerouted a fuel line, added a custom fitting, made a change that probably improved fuel flow but wasn't authorized. Field modification, the kind mechanics made when they knew better than the engineers who'd designed the system. Sometimes field modifications were brilliant. Sometimes they were disasters waiting to happen. This one was in between. Not dangerous, but not properly tested, not properly documented, not properly approved. I documented it, took photos, made detailed notes. When Ramos reviewed my findings, he went pale. That fuel line modification, when did that happen? Based on the fitting wear maybe 6 months ago, maybe longer. And it's not in the logs. No. Jesus. He pulled out his tablet, started going through personnel records. "I need to find out who did this. Unauthorized modifications are a court-martial offense." "Senior Chief, can I make a suggestion?" "What?" "Before you start looking for someone to punish, talk to your crew. Find out who did it and why. Because looking at the modification, it's actually well executed. Improves fuel flow by about 3%. Reduces pressure on the feed pump. It's not a bad modification, it's just unauthorized." Ramos looked at me. "You think I should let this slide? I think you should understand why it happened before you decide how to handle it. Because sometimes the best mechanics are the ones who know when the book is wrong. And sometimes the best leaders are the ones who know when to enforce rules and when to recognize good judgment." He was quiet for a moment, processing that. "You sound like you've been in this situation before." "I've been in every situation before, Senior Chief. That's what 20+ years of service does. You see everything. You learn that rules are important, but judgment matters more." "Where did you serve? Places I can't discuss." "What was your rank unclassified?" "Your unit doesn't exist anymore." Ramos studied me, trying to piece together who I'd been from the fragments I was willing to share. "You were special operations," he said finally. Not a question, a statement. I didn't confirm or deny. And something happened. Something that ended your official service, but not your actual service. Senior Chief, you're speculating about things you don't have clearance to know. Fair enough. He looked back at his tablet. But for what it's worth, ma'am, I'm glad you're here, doing this work, because you're saving lives, and that matters more than whatever happened before. Thank you. And I'll talk to my crew about that modification, find out who did it, figure out if it's worth documenting officially or if it's better to just note it in the unofficial logs and move on. Good call, Senior Chief. That evening, I was packing up my tools when a young petty officer approached, the same one who'd asked about my training on day 1. Ma'am, can I ask you something? Sure. How do you do it? Carry the weight of all this responsibility, knowing that if you miss something, people could die. I looked at him. This kid who was just beginning to understand what the work actually meant. You do it by understanding that missing something is always a possibility, I said. You're human. You can't catch everything. But you do your best. You bring everything you've learned, everything you've experienced, everything you know to be true, and you apply it with absolute precision, and then you trust that your best is good enough. But what if it's not? What if you miss something anyway? Then you learn from it. You figure out what you missed and why you missed it, and you make sure you never miss it again, and you carry that knowledge forward. Use it to be better next time. Does it get easier? I thought about that. About 13 years of inspections, 13 years of findings, 13 years of prevented catastrophes. No, I said honestly. It doesn't get easier, but you get better at carrying the weight. You get stronger. You get more experienced. You learn to trust your judgment, and eventually, the weight becomes part of who you are, not a burden, just reality. How long did it take you to get there? I'm still getting there, Petty Officer. Every day, every inspection, every aircraft. I'm still learning, still growing, still getting better. He nodded slowly. Thank you, ma'am. What's your name? Petty Officer Second Class Ryan Mitchell. Well, Petty Officer Mitchell, keep asking questions, keep learning, keep pushing yourself to be better, because that's how you become the kind of mechanic who saves lives instead of just fixing aircraft. Yes, ma'am, I will. He left, and I realized I'd done it again, turned a simple conversation into a teaching moment, passed down knowledge without meaning to. Maybe that was part of the work too. Maybe that's how you honored the people you'd lost, not just by doing good work yourself, but by teaching others to do good work, by making sure the next generation was better than yours, by making sure the lessons you'd learned the hard way, the painful way, the way that cost lives, didn't have to be learned again. I finished at Coronado on October 26th, filed my final reports, watched as Ramos's crew implemented every recommendation, saw them treat the unauthorized fuel line modification with the judgment I'd suggested. They documented it properly, tested it thoroughly, got it approved retroactively, turned a potential court-martial into a best practice, good leadership, good judgment, good outcome. Ramos walked me to my truck on the last day. You did outstanding work here, Ms. Garrett. 7 findings on the first 2 aircraft, 6 more on the second 2, and that fuel line modification that could have caused real problems if we'd deployed without understanding it. Just the job, Senior Chief. No, ma'am. It's more than that. He handed me a card. That's my direct number. If you ever need anything, a reference, a contact, anything, you call me. Any friend of Colonel Cross is a friend of mine, and anyone who works like you do has earned my respect. Thank you, Senior Chief. That means something. One more thing. Cross mentioned you might be coming back to Falcon Ridge next month for a follow-up inspection. If you do give them my regards, tell them Coronado says they're lucky to have you. I'll do that. We shook hands. I drove away from Naval Air Station Coronado with the same feeling I always had after finishing an assignment. Satisfaction at work well done, exhaustion from the effort, and the quiet certainty that somewhere people would live because of what I'd found. 3 weeks until I went back to Falcon Ridge, 3 weeks to rest, to prepare, to carry the weight a little further down the road. The call came 2 weeks later. I was in a different motel, different city. Same routine, laptop open, reviewing previous inspection reports, making notes on patterns I'd seen, techniques that worked, methods that didn't. My phone rang, unknown number, but something in my instinct said, answer it. Garrett? Ms. Garrett, this is Colonel Nathan Cross. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. Not at all, sir. What can I do for you? I wanted to give you advance notice about something that's happening when you come back next month, something I think you should be prepared for. What is it? We're holding a ceremony, November 15th, Veterans Day. We do it every year, honor the fallen, recognize the living, remind everyone why we serve. Okay. This year, I'd like to do something different. I'd like to recognize you, publicly, for your service. My stomach dropped. Sir, I don't think that's a good idea. I understand your reluctance, but hear me out. I'm not planning to discuss your classified service. I'm not going to reveal anything that's protected. I'm simply planning to recognize you as a veteran who continues to serve through civilian work, who maintains the aircraft that keep our people safe, who exemplifies the values we claim to uphold. Colonel, with respect, I don't want recognition. I don't need it. And it goes against everything I've been trying to do for the past 13 years. I understand, but consider this. What happened in Hangar 7 3 weeks ago that's already changed how people see you? Your cover as it was is already compromised. People know you're more than a civilian contractor. They're asking questions, making assumptions. Some of those assumptions are close to the truth. So you want to control the narrative. I want to give them an official story, one that's true but not complete, one that satisfies their curiosity without exposing classified information, one that lets you continue your work without constant speculation. I was quiet, thinking. What exactly are you proposing, sir? I'm proposing that during the Veterans Day ceremony, I recognize you as a retired veteran who served in classified roles in Afghanistan. I won't mention Task Force Viper. I won't mention specific missions. I won't mention your teammates. I'll simply say that you served with distinction in roles that can't be fully acknowledged and that you continue to serve by ensuring aircraft safety. That's it. That's all. And you think that will satisfy people's curiosity? I think it will give them enough truth that they stop digging for more. I think it will let you continue your work without being invisible, but also without being fully exposed. A middle ground. I thought about that, about the weight of visibility, about the cost of invisibility, about whether there was actually a middle ground or if that was just wishful thinking. Can I think about it, sir? Of course, you have 2 weeks, but I need an answer by November 1st. If you say no, I'll respect that, but I hope you'll say yes, because I think you deserve recognition, and I think the people on this base deserve to understand who you really are. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. Take care, Ms. Garrett. He hung up. I sat there in the motel room, phone in my hand, mind racing, recognition, public acknowledgement, standing in front of people and accepting something I'd spent 13 years avoiding. Everything in me said no, said run, said disappear before it got worse. But Cross was right. The cover was already blown. People already knew. The question wasn't whether to hide, it was how to manage what they knew. And maybe, just maybe, there was value in being seen. In teaching by example. In showing young service members that veterans could continue serving in different ways. That life after classified service didn't have to mean complete erasure. Maybe visibility could be useful, if managed carefully. I opened my laptop, composed an email to Colonel Nathan Cross from Evelyn Garrett, subject Veterans Day ceremony. Sir, I'll do it. Under these conditions, 1. No mention of Task Force Viper or specific operations. 2. No mention of my teammates by name. 3. Keep the focus on current work, not past service. 4. Allow me to review your remarks before the ceremony. If you can agree to these terms, I'll attend and accept recognition. V/R Evelyn Garrett. I sent it before I could change my mind. The response came back in 10 minutes. Ms. Garrett agreed to all terms. I'll send you my draft remarks by November 5th. Thank you for trusting me with this. Respectfully, Colonel Nathan Cross. I closed the laptop, sat back, tried to process what I'd just agreed to. Public recognition. After 13 years of invisibility, Standing in front of people and accepting acknowledgement for service most of them would never understand. Carrying the weight of 3 deaths and 187 lives into the light instead of keeping it hidden in darkness. Maybe it was time. Maybe 13 years was long enough to hide. Maybe Thorne had been right. Maybe living well and doing good work and being visible as an example was how you honored the dead. Maybe. November 15th arrived faster than I expected. I drove back to Falcon Ridge on November 13th, 2 days early. Gave myself time to adjust, to prepare, to remember how to be visible. The base looked the same desert heat, same tarmac, same hangars, but I felt different, not invisible anymore, not hiding, just present, real, carrying weight but not drowning in it. I checked into the Desert Vista Inn, same room, 117, ground floor, everything familiar. But I wasn't the same person who'd stayed here 3 weeks ago. That person had been a ghost. This person was something else, not fully alive, but not fully dead either. Something in between. The morning of November 14th, I drove to the base, not for the ceremony, for the follow-up inspection. The work still needed doing. Sergeant Kane was at the duty station. He stood up when he saw me. "Ma'am, welcome back." "Thank you, Sergeant. I wanted to apologize for 3 weeks ago. I should have intervened sooner, should have stopped Brennan before it went as far as it did. You're not responsible for his actions, Sergeant Kane. Maybe not, but I knew who you were, recognized your signature, knew you'd served with Corbett. I should have protected you better." "You protected me enough, Sergeant. You made sure I could do my work. That's all I needed." Kane was quiet for a moment. Then, "I went to Arlington after I figured out the connection. Paid my respects to Captain Corbett and the others. I hope that was appropriate." My throat tightened. "That was very appropriate, Sergeant. Thank you. He was a good man, good officer. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." "The Blackhawk's ready for follow-up inspection. All repairs completed to spec. Want to verify the work?" "Yes, let's do it." The Blackhawk sat in Base 7, same aircraft, but different now. The tail rotor mounting bracket had been replaced. The hydraulic pump had been swapped. The composite panel had been repaired. I inspected every repair, checked torque on every bolt, verified every connection, made sure the work had been done right. It had been, perfectly, professionally, exactly to specification. Master Sergeant Thorne had overseen the repairs personally, and he'd done them right. "Good work, Sergeant," I told him when he came to check on my progress. "Learned from the best, ma'am. You showed me what to look for. I just applied the lesson." "That's all any of us can do, learn and apply." "You coming to the ceremony tomorrow?" "I am." "Good. People are looking forward to it. Looking forward to understanding more about who you are." "I'm not sure they'll understand much more. Colonel Cross is keeping it vague." "Vague is fine, ma'am. People don't need details. They just need to know you're one of us, that you've served, that you've sacrificed, that you continue to serve. The rest is details." That evening, Cross called me to his office. He handed me a folder. Inside was his draft remarks for the ceremony. I read them carefully. "Tomorrow we honor those who've served and those who continue to serve. Among us today is Ms. Evelyn Garrett, a veteran whose service cannot be fully acknowledged due to classification. What I can tell you is this Ms. Garrett served in special operations roles in Afghanistan. She conducted missions that saved American lives. She made sacrifices few of us can imagine. And when her official service ended, she didn't stop serving. She continues as a civilian contractor to ensure the aircraft we depend on are safe and airworthy. In the past month, her inspections have prevented multiple catastrophic failures. She embodies the values we claim to uphold: duty, honor, service above self. Please join me in recognizing Ms. Garrett for her continued dedication to keeping our people safe. Simple, truthful, not complete, but enough. This works, sir. Good. I'll deliver it as written. You'll stand beside me, accept a certificate of appreciation. That's it. 30 seconds. Then you can disappear back into the crowd. Thank you, sir. No, ma'am, thank you for agreeing to this, for letting us honor you, even if it makes you uncomfortable. November 15th, Veterans Day, 0900 hours. The ceremony was held on the parade ground, 300 personnel in formation, dress uniforms, flags, the whole formal military ritual. I stood off to the side, civilian clothes, simple black pants, white blouse, no insignia, nothing to draw attention. Cross gave his speech, honored the fallen, recognized active duty personnel, spoke about service and sacrifice and duty. Then he got to my part. And now I'd like to recognize someone special. He gestured for me to join him. I walked across the parade ground, every eye on me. 300 people watching this middle-aged woman in civilian clothes approach the podium. Cross read his prepared remarks, word for word, exactly as written. The crowd was silent, listening, processing. When he finished, he handed me a certificate, shook my hand, said, "Thank you for your service," loud enough for everyone to hear. I took the certificate, said, "Thank you, sir," quietly, started to walk away. But then something happened. One person started clapping, then another, then another. Within seconds, the entire formation was applauding. Not polite applause, real applause, the kind that comes from genuine respect. I stopped, turned back, looked at these 300 people who'd just learned a fraction of my story, and I saw it in their faces. Not pity, not curiosity, not speculation, respect, recognition, understanding that I was one of them, that I'd been where they were going, that I'd survived what they feared. And in that moment, I realized something. Invisibility had protected me, but it had also isolated me. Visibility was dangerous, but it was also connecting. These people saw me now, really saw me. And instead of exposing me, it was validating me. I nodded once, acknowledging their recognition. Then I walked back to my place in the crowd. The ceremony continued, but I was somewhere else mentally, processing what had just happened. I'd spent 13 years hiding, 13 years invisible, 13 years carrying weight alone, and in 30 seconds of visibility, I'd found something I didn't know I needed: connection, community, recognition, not for who I'd been, but for who I still was. Someone who served, someone who sacrificed, someone who continued the work even when the uniform came off. After the ceremony, people approached me, not many, but enough. "Corporal Brennan," he saluted, said, "Thank you for your service, ma'am, and thank you for giving me a second chance." "Senior Airman Calloway," he shook my hand, said, "My mother wanted me to tell you something. She said the hardest part of service isn't the fighting, it's the coming home, and she said you're doing it right." Petty Officer Mitchell from Coronado. He'd driven up from California for the ceremony, said, "I wanted to see you recognized, wanted to understand more about who taught me those lessons. Thank you, ma'am." And Sergeant Kane, he pulled me aside, said quietly, "I spoke to Corbett's widow, told her about you, about what happened here. She wanted me to give you something." He handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten, dated November 10th, 2024. "Dear Ms. Garrett, Sergeant Kane told me about you, about what happened at Falcon Ridge, about the tattoo you carry. James told me about you. Not your name, he couldn't, but he told me about his teammate, the woman he trusted more than anyone, the soldier who never quit, the person he knew would finish any mission, no matter the cost. He told me that if anything ever happened to him, I should know it wasn't because his team failed. It was because the mission required sacrifice, and his team would make sure that sacrifice meant something. I've spent 13 years wondering if that was true, wondering if his death meant anything, wondering if anyone remembered. Now I know you remember. You've been remembering every single day. You've been making his sacrifice mean something with every aircraft you inspect, every life you save, every person you teach. Thank you for carrying him, for honoring him, for making sure he didn't die for nothing. I don't need to know the details. I don't need to understand what happened. I just need to know that someone remembers, that someone cares, that someone is still fighting the fight he started. You're that someone, and I'm grateful. With deepest respect, Sarah Corbett. I read it twice, then folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, put the envelope in my pocket, and I cried. Not quietly, not subtly, just stood there in the parking lot and cried. Because for 13 years I'd thought I was carrying the weight alone, that nobody understood, that nobody cared, that the 3 people I'd left behind were forgotten by everyone except me. But Sarah Corbett remembered, Kane remembered, Cross remembered, Thorne remembered. I wasn't carrying them alone. I never had been. I'd just been too invisible to see the other people carrying them with me. That night I sat in the motel room. Certificate of appreciation on the desk, letter from Sarah Corbett beside it. I opened my laptop, opened the file with 3 names. Captain James Corbett, Sergeant Declan Hayes, Corporal Sloan Winters. I added a note. Today I was visible. Today I was recognized. Today I learned I'm not alone. Today I found out your widow knows you didn't die for nothing, knows someone remembers, knows someone is still making it count. Thank you for giving the order. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for the sacrifice. I'll keep carrying you, but now I know I'm not carrying you alone. I closed the laptop, looked at the certificate. Certificate of Appreciation presented to Evelyn Garrett. In recognition of continued service to the United States Armed Forces through dedication to aircraft safety and training excellence, Falcon Ridge Air Station, November 15th, 2024. Simple words. But they meant everything. Because for the first time in 13 years, I felt like maybe I'd done enough. Maybe I'd carried the weight far enough. Maybe I'd honored the sacrifice sufficiently. Not that I could stop, not that the work was done, but that I'd earned the right to carry it differently, to carry it with help, to carry it in the light instead of the darkness, to be visible instead of invisible, to be real instead of a ghost. 3 days later, my phone rang, the alphanumeric sender, the voice I'd never met but had been reporting to for 13 years. Garrett. Ms. Garrett, this is Colonel Marcus Webb, Defense Counterintelligence Agency. We've been monitoring your work for the past 13 years. I know. I'm calling to inform you of a change in your assignment parameters. What kind of change? Based on your performance at Falcon Ridge and Coronado, and based on your successful transition to semi-public status, we're expanding your role. You'll continue aircraft inspections, but you'll also begin training other inspectors, passing down your expertise, creating a legacy. A legacy. Yes. You've developed methods that save lives, skills that can't be learned from manuals. We want you to teach them, formalize them, make sure they outlive you. And my classified status remains classified, but your current identity can be more visible. You can be Evelyn Garrett, veteran instructor expert, just not Evelyn Garrett, former Task Force Viper operator. That stays buried. I can live with that. Good. Your next assignment is Peterson Air Force Base, Colorado. You'll conduct inspections and train their senior maintenance personnel. After that, we'll rotate you through 6 more bases over the next year, each time you inspect and you teach. Understood. And Ms. Garrett, thank you for your service, all of it, past and present. Thank you, sir. He hung up. I sat there processing a new mission, not just inspecting, teaching, passing it down, making sure the next generation could do what I did, making sure the lessons I'd learned the hard way, the painful way, the way that cost 3 lives got shared, got preserved, got used to save more lives. That felt right. That felt like the right way to honor Corbett Hayes and Winters, not just by doing the work myself, but by teaching others to do it, by multiplying the impact, by making sure their sacrifice rippled outward farther than I could reach alone. I spent that week preparing, not just packing tools and reviewing aircraft specs, but preparing myself for what teaching meant. For 13 years I'd worked alone, kept my knowledge to myself, stayed invisible. Now I was being asked to step into the light, to share what I knew, to train others to see what I saw, feel what I felt, understand what I understood. It felt like exposing something sacred, like taking the lessons I'd learned from Corbett Hayes and Winters' lessons paid for in blood and sacrifice, and handing them to people who might not understand their weight. But that was the point, wasn't it? If the lessons died with me, then their sacrifice meant nothing beyond the 187 lives saved in 2011. But if I taught others, if I multiplied the impact, if I created a generation of inspectors who could see failures before they became catastrophes, then Corbett, Hayes, and Winters would save lives forever. Not just through me, through everyone I taught, and everyone they taught after that. Legacy. That's what Colonel Webb had called it. Maybe he was right. 1 week later, I drove to Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado. New assignment, new aircraft, same mission, but different now, because I wasn't invisible anymore. I was visible. I was real. I was carrying 3 deaths and 187 lives and 13 years of service into the light. And I wasn't alone. I had Sarah Corbett's letter in my pocket. I had Cross's certificate on my wall. I had Kane and Thorne and Calloway and Mitchell and Ramos and all the others who'd learned from me and taught me and reminded me that the work mattered. I had proof that invisibility wasn't the only way to honor the dead, that sometimes being seen was part of the service, that sometimes the ghosts needed to step into the light, not to stop being ghosts, but to become something more. Guides, teachers, examples, people who'd been through hell and came out carrying lessons worth sharing. I pulled up to the gate at Peterson, showed my credentials, got waved through, drove to the duty station, signed in with block letters and precise spacing. The duty sergeant looked at my signature, looked at me, nodded with recognition. "Ms. Garrett, we've been expecting you. Colonel Morrison wanted me to tell you he's looking forward to working with you. Said Colonel Cross at Falcon Ridge gave him a call, said you're the best he's ever worked with." "Colonel Cross is kind." "Colonel Cross is accurate, ma'am. We've reviewed your inspection reports from Falcon Ridge and Coronado. That's outstanding work." "Thank you, Sergeant. Aircraft are ready for inspection whenever you are, and we've set aside time tomorrow afternoon for you to brief our senior maintenance staff on your methodologies, if that works for you." "That works fine." I grabbed my toolbox, walked into the hangar. New base, new people, new aircraft, same work, but different now. Because I wasn't just inspecting, I was teaching. I was passing it down. I was making sure the next generation could do what I did. I was making sure Corbett, Hayes, and Winters hadn't died for nothing. Every aircraft I inspected, every person I taught, every life I saved, that was them, living on through me, through the work, through the legacy, and that was enough. Not perfect, not painless, but enough. I set down my toolbox, pulled out my clipboard, started the inspection. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I heard 3 voices. Corbett, make it count, Valkyrie. Hayes, make it mean something. Winters, don't look back. I smiled, first time in years. Still making it count, Captain, I whispered. Every damn day. And I got to work. Because that's what you do when you're a ghost who's learned to live in the light. You keep doing the work. You keep saving lives, you keep teaching, you keep honoring the dead by living well, and you never ever stop. Not until the work is done, and the work is never done. So you just keep going, one inspection at a time, one life at a time, one lesson at a time, forever.